Give Justin Rhodes 2.5 hours and he'll teach you everything you need to know about keeping chickens. In today's episode of the podcast, we'll talk with Rhodes about his 10-year journey of raising permaculture chickens, including how he went from feeding expensive grain to using a compost feeding system that can actually put more money in his pocket, except for the fact that he uses it. We'll discuss this and more coming up next. Aloha and Melek Aliki Maka, heretics. This is Adrian Hugh, the Nutrition Heretic. December marks our 1-year anniversary since we started the Nutrition Heretic podcast. In that time, we've interviewed some of the most pioneering and controversial heretics in the field of nutrition, health, and everything that goes along with that, from farming to spirituality. So next year we have plans to get experts on other controversial issues such as raw milk and to weigh in on vaccines. Plus, we'd like to add some live Q&As to get your personal questions answered, how-tos on shopping on a budget, and even some cooking demos. So, when you're doing your holiday shopping this year, please think cock. Why? Because 50 Ways to Eat Cock is a crowd pleaser, and everybody loves to stuff their throats with cock. So if you'd like to see some of this content coming up next year, please go to Amazon.com and look up 50 Ways to Eat Cock, Frenching Your Food, or Honey Lingus. You can also go to nutritionheretic.com/books. And look, if you can't afford the books, please share it on social media because maybe some of your friends could. Thank you so much. It's been great serving you. See you next year.
Fat is bad for you.
I just pop a pill and I'm fine.
Meat is murder.
It's time for bad food punishment. It's time for real nourishment. It's time for the Nutrition Heretic.
The following program is provided as information only and may not be construed as medical or health advice. It is not intended to diagnose, treat, or cure any disease. No action or inaction should be taken solely on the basis of the information provided here. Please consult with a licensed healthcare professional or doctor on any matter relating to your health and well-being. Hello and welcome to the Nutrition Heretic podcast. This is Adrian Hugh, the Nutrition Heretic. And this week, we're going to be talking about my new venture with my family. As you know, I live in Hawaii. We have chickens running wild, and a few months, actually about 5 months ago, my daughter decided that she wanted to take a chicken home from the park. I didn't let her do it because we didn't have a coop, but when my husband started building a coop, I got a call when he was about halfway through the project asking if I wanted to adopt 11 baby chicks. And I said, sure. So, we got the 11 chicks, and she actually threw in the mom because, again, we have chickens running wild here and they were just crowding her yard and she had plenty of chickens. She didn't need any more. And so now this has opened this Pandora's box with, my household. Of course, the child who wanted to bring home the chickens is the most reluctant to actually feed and care for them. But, you know, it opens up a lot of questions about where our food comes from, how we care for it, how do we do it in the most sustainable way. Being in Hawaii, I don't like the idea of importing grain to feed my chickens, especially because so many things grow wild here. I don't really see a need for that. And I figure that before, you know, the kind of large scale farming that was so intense on grain feed for chickens, that there must be other solutions. And that brings me to today's guest heretic, who is Justin Rhodes of AbundantPermaculture.com. If you know anything about raising chickens, if you've looked up anything online, chances are you have seen one of Justin's YouTube videos or stumbled across his website and blog. He's got a tremendous wealth of information, and I am so happy to have him on the show today. Welcome, Justin.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Oh, well, I'm excited. And I'm going to lead in by asking you, first of all, what's permaculture in your mind, and what's permaculture chickens?
I would say permaculture, let's just be simple here since we're talking about chickens and growing food. Let's say permaculture is a way of growing food. It's a way of designing for growing food that works with nature rather than against it to create more abundance with less input. So or you might even say it's a way of gardening or farming that copies nature. For instance, you see that nature doesn't like bare ground, so she naturally covers herself. Nature is naturally modest, so she covers herself with bare ground, right? So we can take that and say, okay, well, we're going to grow a garden, and maybe there's some disturbance there to put in our garden, but let's quickly then cover her. And so she doesn't cover herself with all these crazy wild weeds. Maybe we can cover her with mulch or wood chip mulch or some hay or something of that nature that we're controlling, but we're still working with her to give her what she desires, but we're using it to our benefit. But the ironic thing there is when you work with her, you're also benefiting. You're benefiting yourself, but you're also benefiting her.
Right. Oh, you know what? That's the best description of permaculture that I've heard, because the first person I knew who was trying to do permaculture was kind of funny. I have a friend, she's from Italy, and we were working on a school garden, and we were trying to help, and we're cleaning up, and, we're taking out some weeds that seemed like they could harbor ticks, and we didn't want that going near the kids, we're like taking out just the really big things and trying to, you know how in Europe they have a very different look or idea of natural landscapes.
Yeah.
And here we kind of like savage, we just don't touch it at all, right? So we pulled out some of the weeds, and the one teacher who I guess was considered the head gardener at the school flipped out. And next thing we know, he's trying to replant the weeds that we pulled out because he thought that what we did was just an abomination to what they were trying to achieve. We're thinking more about the fact that Lyme disease is a huge problem in the Northeast where I used to live. And he's trying to get the weeds back in the ground, which I know that they serve a function, but when they're that big, I don't know that that's what we want. And particularly that close to the school building. So I'm glad to hear that you have what sounds to me like a more harmonious understanding and not just going purely savage and unkempt. Let's say.
Yeah.
Now, how does that apply to chickens when you say permaculture chickens?
Okay, well, another concept of permaculture is the idea of connecting things. If you want to come away with anything about what permaculture is, just think of this as a way. Think of it as a way to connect things. Like you could have a great garden, or you can be a good gardener, and you can have chickens and be a good chicken ninja. And so you have those two things separate, right? Well, what permaculture does then is say, how can we make the chicken and the garden work together? And so you begin to realize when you begin to study and think, okay, what does the chicken need and what does the chicken give? And what does the garden need and what does the garden give? And you can do that with all the things of your garden, which permaculture calls elements. So once you decide and see that, hey, a chicken naturally goes around and scratches, right?
Mm-hmm.
They naturally go around and manure like 8 pounds a month, okay? And they naturally eat bugs and they naturally eat vegetation. So then you could say, oh, wait a minute, I could use a chicken to till my garden with its scratching, because my garden needs tilling. I could use a chicken to fertilize. You talked about ticks in the Northeast with Lyme disease. I've got Lyme disease. You can use chickens to eat those ticks. Okay, and so that's then what I teach in my movie. Not just how to raise chickens from hatching to the plate, but also how to use chickens in an entire design that works with everything that's on your farm or backyard or whatever, or community garden.
Right, right. Yeah. And, that is, one of the things that is becoming even more attractive about chickens. As a matter of fact, this morning somebody owed me some fish. And I told her, I said, if you're, if it's not a problem to keep the head and the guts and all of that, my chickens will eat them. And she was shocked that they would eat that. And I'm like, yeah, these, the farmers call them pigs with wings for a reason, because they will literally eat anything. And, not that I would give them just anything. But I'm pretty darn frugal. I'll put it that way. And, I was always composting. I've been doing it for probably 2 decades now, but dang, you add chicken to that, to that mix and like there's nothing left. As a matter of fact, one of the things that I found, even though I don't import grain, I live next door to a brewery. They import grain. Right?
Yes.
But what they do is when they've used the grain, they dump it into these buckets. And you tell me whether or not this is, good or bad. But in the buckets, it's literally just the barley. And then the grubs that start growing because flies come and lay their eggs and all of that. So that's teeming with larvae. And I supplement their table scraps with that. Yeah. Is that a good thing, a bad thing? Are they missing something? I'm thinking they're getting extra protein.
I think it's great. Actually, I think if a chicken had a choice, it would eat 70% of its diet on those grubs.
Right.
So, but it sounds like you have a variety for them. The problem that you would have is if you only offered them that barley and there were no grubs in it. That made me feel better that there were grubs. I mean, if you want to only feed a chicken something, only feed it grubs,
Wow.
But you can't, the chicken can't just live on grass or just on barley or wheat or corn or whatever. They have to have a variety. Preferably breaking it down into thirds. A third of and by the way, they'll eat about a third pound food a day, and a third of that is in greens, which are going to come from your scraps and out in the grass. A third of it needs to come from animal proteins. They are not vegetarian. I cringe when I see vegetarian, companies bragging about vegetarian fed chickens because that's not their natural way.
That just means more soy and corn.
Yeah, and it's not what they would eat in nature. And we've only been feeding these grains for the last 100 years. I mean, you alluded to it earlier. I mean, chickens have been with us for at least 10,000 years, and only commercialized industrial grains the last 100, and not even strong. I mean, on this farm 50 years ago, they weren't importing grains. I mean, you can totally sustain. Just let a chicken go. You could totally sustain, especially in Hawaii. It's probably a higher number, but you could do a dozen chickens on 1 acre all year round, and that's here in North Carolina, like cold temperate. So that's with having a winter. But there, I imagine you could probably double that because they're going to get their grains, they're going to get their animal proteins, and I didn't say yet, but the third one is the grains. I said the animal proteins and the greens, but then they do need grains, but it doesn't have to be corn,
right,
or a legume like soy or anything like that. It's in nature, it would be seeds. Yes. It would just be grass seeds or whatever.
Right. What about? I'm just thinking Hawaii papaya seeds.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, give it to them and see. Now, I
no, they eat it. They eat it. I don't know. I was just wondering how much that when you talk about the seeds.
As long as papaya seeds aren't the only thing you give them,
right?
And you set it out to them, and they have a choice, and they eat that papaya seed. That's to me saying, oh, it's okay.
Absolutely.
You read I know it's a fictional book, but the Swiss Family Robinson, what they would do is feed the chickens and the monkeys this strange food and see if they would eat it.
Right.
And if they would, they knew that the people could eat it too because they have similar digestive systems, right? Well, the chickens and the monkeys still got it. They still know what they can and can't eat.
Right.
And
exactly.
So just let them have it as long as it's not their own. I mean, I think people like to try to find things chicken can't eat. But it's few. I mean, people say, "Oh, don't give them citrus or onions or garlic. It makes the eggs taste like onion and garlic." Well, first of all, I like onion and garlic in my eggs.
Pre-seasoned chicken.
Yeah, right. But second of all, it doesn't do that. It's not true. And people say, "Oh, the avocado pit and skin." Well, if I give them avocados, even whole, that are getting like old or whatever, what you'll notice is the chicken won't eat the skin in the pit.
Right.
They'll leave it there. Uncooked potatoes, they say not give it to them. They won't eat it. I mean, I'll have chickens on my compost pile and I'll throw everything in there. And what the chickens don't eat, will end up being eaten by the earth in the compost pile.
Well, that's the other thing is, you brought up a really good thing, which is, people talk about, don't give them anything you wouldn't eat. It shouldn't be rotting. It shouldn't be this. I'm like, but they eat the compost pile. Like they want rotting. They want things that are teeming with bugs and larvae and half rotten. The one thing I find they won't eat is, sweet potato leaves.
Okay.
And my pumpkin leaves, even though my friends said that they love pumpkin and sweet potato leaves, they will not touch that unless it's, such a piss poor amount, in the mix that I'm giving them. But, I was like, cause I had them going wild here for a while, and I was like, oh, great. The chickens will eat it. They didn't want anything to do with it. So I just turned it under. Fine. So I just turned it under, and I figure it'll compost under there. And when they start scratching, it'll, be full of worms and what have you, and they'll get it then.
Yeah, the worms will eat it, and then the chickens will eat the worms, so they'll eventually get it.
Right, exactly, and so that's good to know. So tell us a little bit about your progression, because you went through a lot of experimentation, and where you started in terms of purchasing feed, and where you are now, because you're actually kind of making money. Like you're not losing anything. You're not really investing anymore, it seems, on your chickens when it comes to feeding.
Yeah, my journey was a fun one. We started eating, growing our own food because we wanted to take control of our health. It first started with a health conviction, and then it was like, oh, wait a minute. And then me being a cheapwad was like, oh, it's cheaper to grow our own. And so let's combine inexpensive and healthy, and let's do this thing. Well, we were just buying we had just started buying like anybody. You go somewhere like the Tractor Supply and you just buy the feed or whatever and get going. And I still think that's better than if you were going to go to the grocery store, because those birds are captivated inside, plus getting that crap feed, right? So
exactly.
Just start with something, because at least your birds are outside eating grass. They're getting chlorophyll from the grass. They're combating, even if there's GMOs in there. They're sort of a filter for that, okay? So, but then we started buying this local feed. So that's where it started. Well, at least the local feed, we could see that, hey, there's corn in here. We could actually recognize it. And we could pronounce most of the things on the feed bag. Well, we decided we'd buy like 2,000 pounds, like a ton, because we had like 100 chickens at the time. This was going to save us even more money. It's going to save us like a third. And at this time we were selling egg shares, which meant people could pay every month, and they get a dozen eggs a week. Well, we hauled down there. It was about an hour away in South Carolina. I'm in North Carolina. And we picked this up. The big, strong men, I mean, they could do this all day. These big 300-pound strong guys, one 50-pound bag in each hand loading our little trailer. Our trailer's about to sag. They get it, and we've got the kids with us, and we say, hey, would you guys like to give us a tour? Oh, sure. They were happy to give us a tour, and we walked around, and it was just, looking back now, it was just looking awfully, I don't know, conventional. It smelled, and by the way, when you have smell, you have mismanagement. The farm should not smell, a compost pile should not smell, chicken operation should not smell. So we're picking up on a smell, we're seeing these huge fields, big tractors, big silos, and my wife finally at the end of the tour says, is this GMO? Mm-hmm. And they said, oh yeah, we have to do GMO to do blah, blah, this week. Well, apparently she was on a new kick in our health journey. You don't just drop it all right away, Right. You run out of conventional milk and you replace it with organic.
Exactly.
And you just go at it that way. So we go down the road. We go away with it because they've already loaded it. We've already paid for it. And she breaks down crying about 5 minutes down the road. And I'm like, what? And I didn't even know what a GMO was at the time. She explained it to me, and I was like, all right, let's take it back. Or I think our first thought was, oh, okay, let's sell it. And then we're like, oh, no, we don't want to sell it. We'll just find somewhere to get organic. What are we going to do? So we'll say, okay, let's take it back. And they were kind. They took it back, no problem. But we were faced with a problem because we were going home and we only had like a half a bag of organic. And that food, those grains that we just dropped off were $11 a bag. Mm. And the food at home that we were going to have to buy in store, which at the time was kind of hard to get a hold of. Like organic's getting more and more popular. It's easier to get a hold of. And price hasn't dropped necessarily, but it's like $34 a bag. So it's 3 times as expensive. And so I said on the way home, okay, we can't do that. I mean, the customers aren't going to afford to pay $10 a dozen. What we're going to need to make any money on this. So I said, okay, this is what we're going to do. Our birds are in the pasture. One thing we're going to do, they're an electric poultry net, which is a mobile a net that you can move around fairly easy. I said, we're going to move that instead of once a week, we're going to move it every day. And I got to where I could move that net, and I had them in a mobile house. I called it a chickshaw, which it was a chicken coop on two wheels with a handle on it, just like a Asian rickshaw.
Yeah.
And I got to where I could move their whole operation, water, feed, net, and house in like 9 minutes.
Wow.
And it was fun, to move the chickens every day, and they would come out. And the only other thing I did was say, okay, a chicken, like you said earlier, a chicken is a pig with wings. They will eat so much. I'm going to start rationing their food for one. So, all right, I cut it back to 1/3 pound a day. Like no chicken in there it should ever eat more than 1/3 pound. The reason they do is because they're naturally ingrained that they don't know when their next meal is, and they don't trust you, and it's not ingrained in them to say, oh, they're going to feed me tomorrow too. They just see food and they will eat it, and their crop will just swell. And if they do that, they'll actually get overweight, and it'll actually lower their production. A fat hen will be a non-productive hen. So I said 1/3 pound, and then I'm going to cut it back by 10% every week until it finally affects their egg production. Well, my gosh, I just kept cutting back, and and I was I cut back to 1/3 pound initially, and then I was down to like 1/10 pound.
Wow.
Of food a day. I think I cut it back. I cut my feed costs over 70%, the consumption 70%. And here's the good news. I was now spending less on commercial grains, even buying organic feed 3 times as much. I was now spending less money than I was before buying the $11.
Wow.
But just because I had said, I'm going to ration and cut back to see what they're getting off the land, because if given the chance, they'll find their own feed in the pasture or in the forest or on the compost pile. And they did that. But it went even further. That wasn't good enough for me. I saw a video. Jeff Lawton, he's like the grandson of permaculture, had figured out a way to feed chickens 100% on compost. And that's through a series of 4 compost piles rotated through every week. And I won't get into the description there, but essentially I went to then put my chickens in one area, but on 4 compost piles that rotate through. And I did have a source of a local grocery store for some chicken scraps, which is maybe not necessary because Carl Hammer of Vermont Composting has like 1,200 chickens on a commercial composting area, and he doesn't feed them anything and there's only 5% food residual in his compost. So the chickens are getting most of their food in compost if you're doing the compost right. That's the trick. Compost piles got to be big enough. You got to have enough piles, at least 4 compost piles for 24 chickens. And when I say a compost pile, I mean at least 3 square yards. Okay. And you've got to it's had to have heated up. It's had to have heated up to like 130 degrees. And that way it gets going. And then the chickens find food in there that you can't even see. Right. They're finding the microbial life that's protein for them and maybe some food scraps, and they're surviving there. Is egg production as high as if you were giving them 1/3 pound of commercial feed every day? Not in my case, but it doesn't matter because your eggs are brighter orange. Right. They're probably so much more healthier. I haven't had it tested, but you're not having to have this expensive import. Absolutely. And with the compost system, you get a square cubic yard of compost every week. Every week. Every week. So that you didn't just cut your feed costs 100%. Around here, that if somebody were to come pick it up, they would pay me $80 to come get that every week. So. And is somebody doing that? Is somebody coming by to pay you $80 a week? No, because I used it. I use it. Right. That's. And now that winter's come on, we don't do that compost system. We buy our grains whole as whole grains, which automatically saves 18%, and then we soak it, which saves you another 15% because that breaks down the internutrients, and then we mix it ourselves and feed it to them, which I've saved 30% right there, and then we do creative feeds throughout the winter as much as we can. Right. Do you sprout that when you're soaking, or just Okay. I can. In the winter, I do, because what sprouting gives you is that green element.
Exactly.
And around
Exactly.
here, we don't have greens all year round. So when you let it sprout up a little bit, not only do you get the grain, you get the green too.
Right, right. Yeah, that's an incredible journey, and I mean, I think that should be very, very inspiring for a lot of people looking for different ways, because just like what happened with your family, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the show. Not, I mean, yes, I have this thing that we're going on with our family, learning how to do chickens ourselves. But I think it's a natural progression. Like you said, you switch out the one product for the next, and then, you might find out, hey, the people raising those organic eggs in the supermarket really are not doing what I know they should be doing.
Yeah.
And just for those people who don't understand what he's talking about when he talks about the bright orange yolk, that means that, the more orange they are, the more vitamin A, and I'm talking about preformed vitamin A, not carotenes, that are in the egg yolk. So, this is, it's an important, anti-infective, vitamin. It's important for fetal development. It's important for our immunity. And in a time where people are, relying on vaccines or not relying on vaccines, we have to understand where our vitamin A is coming from. And, these types of eggs are the perfect place. So, what are some of the, I don't know that I've gotten into this yet in your literature and videos that I've watched, but what are some of the common diseases that people might want to be aware of in their flock?
I've had, in all my 10 years, I've had 2 or 3 chickens die, and I've had at least a dozen that entire time. So I'm going to say prevention is the key. Now, disease you have to worry about, I don't, even then, I'm a little bit different in my opinion on that. Well, first of all, I think you can prevent most of them by just giving them access to fresh air, clean water, and a good, healthy food mix. Okay. So you have, even if you were buying store-bought food, did they have chance to pick some grass every once in a while? Did they have a chance to get some bugs that come through the yard? Something like that. You're going to cut out so many of your problems just right there.
Right.
Okay. And then if a bird gets sick, and not everybody, and that doesn't need to intimidate anybody. Oh, I don't know what it's going to get. What sickness is going to get. I don't know if it matters. If you have a sick chicken, somebody that's not keeping up with everybody else. Well, first of all, chickens are so tough, but they've gotten to that point. It's gotten pretty bad because they got to be tough, or because a chicken will eat a chicken. I mean, they'll take each other down for the sake of their species. They're like, you said, they're like pigs with feathers. I think they're dinosaurs with feathers. Okay,
totally.
They're rough, and they're like they're the closest living relative to T-Rex. I sometimes call these guys dinos. So you got to keep up and about it. So if you see somebody that's getting a little sickly, really just separate that one and put it in a quiet, clean place. Give it some water, give it some feed, but take that water and feed a little further. Put some apple cider vinegar in that water, put some honey in that water, put a couple of cloves of garlic in that water. Okay, about a half a gallon of warm water, 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar, a half a cup of honey, and 2 cloves of minced garlic. And that's going to help bring back their immune system. You could do this with an injured bird too. And in fact, I've had a lot more injuries than I've had sicknesses because you accidentally run them over with your chicken tractor, moving the coop, or a child steps on them or something like that. Also, then ferment their feed, and that goes further than soaking. On soaking, you just put your grains in a bucket or a bowl, and you just put water 4 inches above it, and you let it sit overnight. If you ferment it, you just leave it in there for 3 days covered with water.
Right.
And that then can give them a health boost, just like it could give you. I mean, I call that water mixture magic water. You could totally drink that magic water. You could totally ferment for your food, and it would totally boost your immune system. And I would do that for that sick bird, just keeping them separated so they don't get taken down by the other dinos. And until it recovers or doesn't recover.
Right.
Okay, now some people, if they're backyard pets, then you take them to the vet. If you're a homestead, they're livestock like they are to me, they recover or they don't. And if they don't, it's okay because it's going to strengthen the flock overall, especially because I breed them. I certainly wouldn't want to breed back to that one that got sickly.
Right.
Even if it recovered, I would mark it in some way, and that would not be one of my breeders because I want to breed the strongest of the strong, the most adaptable to my land, because my goal is sustainability and productivity in the long run.
Right, right. Wow, yeah, and there's so many parallels. Sorry, my brain always misfires during interviews because people say these interesting things and I don't know which direction to talk about first. It's only logical that what is good for human health is good for chicken health. So when you're talking about the clean water, clean air, the oxygen itself kills bacteria and viruses and, helps to keep the immune system strong. And also the ferments, because, and sorry, listeners, I'm going to bring up what I'm doing right now, which is Korean natural farming. I don't know if you're familiar with it, Justin, but one of the inputs that we use is lactic acid bacteria, which is essentially whey that comes off of milk that is fermented using essentially the must, I guess, of rice. So what you would do is you soak your rice, you get the inoculant for your milk, and then you use that to separate the whey from the cheese from this other scummy layer. And that lactic acid bacteria, we use that all the time for spraying down the coop, for putting in their water, for spraying down their food. As a matter of fact, when I get the grains from next door, I will spray that down. I'm not necessarily in a situation where I can just have, open buckets all over the place, to keep all of the grubs alive. But I will ferment them in the bucket with the lactic acid bacteria, which I found the chicken when I first opened a bokashi bucket, which uses the same system, and because I ran out of food and I was like, oh, I got stuff in the bokashi bucket, so I emptied some and I tried to get it in there while the chickens were out running, and they stopped running and they jumped on the pile and they jumped in the hole and they were done with the contents of the bucket within about a half an hour. And that's when I learned how much they really, really love and thrive on that type of content.
Nice. The air and clean water, but also sunshine. I forgot to add good access to sunshine as opposed to the commercial birds. You're doing so much better than if you were to buy them in the store.
Right, right. And how much sunshine, when you say sunshine, are you talking like physically under the sun or more pineal gland need to see the sun?
I would say the latter, having the choice to go out in the sun.
Right.
And also having the choice to go in the shade if they want to. Like my coops, they could go back in them during the day if they want to and get out of the sun or the rain or the elements. They could also go under the coop.
Yes.
And if needed in some areas, if you want, provide a shade cloth out there option, or sometimes I'll put my water up on a pallet where they could actually go under that pallet for protection from the sun or the elements or aerial predators. So I think it's important to give them that option. They know what they can eat, but they know also that when and how much sunshine they need.
Right, right. Yeah. And it is interesting because I notice my chickens, they'll go and they'll sit on the ledge up by the coop, the top of the coop, where they normally sleep at night. And sometimes they like to just hang out up there. Yeah. And then some of the other ones will go underneath it and hang out down there. What we're working on right now is a nipple watering system. So that we catch the rainwater and just throw the lactic acid bacteria down there, and they just get a constant supply when they're drinking throughout the day. So we want to we want to install the plumbing upstairs and downstairs for them, so that they have their option of when they, whenever, if for some reason, kid gets up late, to let them out in the morning, they can drink a little water, while they're waiting. And what's fantastic about it, like you said, no smell. So when they're getting those ferments, it's automatically, cleaning their digestive tract, and their shit doesn't stink. Quite literally. What are the advantages of having the rooster around versus not? Because I think this is a one of those things that, people are terrified that the rooster is going to attack their kids or their girlfriend or what have you. Is it paramount to have the rooster there, or do you sometimes separate out the rooster? How many roosters per how many birds?
It's not paramount to have a rooster. You do not need to have a rooster to have eggs. The reason you may want to have a rooster is primarily to reproduce. So if you want to breed your own for 100% sustainability and not even count on a hatchery or a breeder or anything like that, and you just want to have a rooster and some hens and let them mate and have some chicks, then you need a rooster. That would be the primary reason for him. He can service at least 15 birds. It's probably more ideal that he services 8. So one rooster to 8 hens. You want roosters to have competition. So if you have 16 birds or hens or something, then you want 2 roosters because one rooster can be too dominating and too hard on the hens. Does a rooster have to be mean? No. Now, if he's genetically wired to mean and you've never provoked him in any way, which you might provoke him on accident, you have to walk around them slowly. You're feeding them from the beginning. You aren't having any sudden movements. You're very careful when handling the hens that you're watching where he is. If you have a more progressive one, you take out some kind of shield with you, maybe a cardboard box, or maybe a tin, something like that, but put you between him and you. You also, I went out one day to feed the chickens, and we used to kind of have a mean rooster, but he went to attack me, jump up on my leg. He wasn't going to really hurt me, but he did attack me, and it scared me. Well, my natural instinct was to pull that leg back to kick him, but I caught myself, and I thought, no, don't kick him. I caught myself and didn't kick him. And although naturally that's what my defense system wanted to do, I said, no, my brain interfered and said, you know what, better, you have a handful of food in your hand. Just bend down and give him a piece of that bread, whatever, some food scraps from the grocery store at the time. And I put my hand out and fed him. And that is going to go a lot further than kicking him or scaring him. Kids are worse for that. If they get attacked by a rooster, they have a vendetta and they might start picking on that rooster from outside the fence when they're safe, and that's just going to make the situation worse. You can also breed that out. I mean, cull that one. That means give it away, sell it, or butcher it, and just keep the roosters that are kind. I mean, you can totally select and breed for that, and they are different. I mean, we just raised a flock where we didn't know if they were hens or male or female, and I think there were about 3 or 4 roosters in that. One of them was mean.
Right.
So I would cook that one.
Right.
And pick the nicest out of the other 3 if that was my priority. And because you pick for, hey, this one's nice. This one's big. That means it's going to give me a lot of meat. This lady over here, she lays a lot of eggs. So I would want to keep her and breed her,
Right.
So you just take the qualities you're interested in, save those ones, and breed those, and let the others be.
Right. Yeah. Well, I'm not sure how much you looked at what I do, but part of my claim to fame is I wrote a book called 50 Ways to Eat Cock, Healthy Chicken Recipes with Balls, because my friend she went to the hatchery and she got 50, what she was told at least, half of them would be hens. Every last one of them was a rooster. And so she invited me over to her farm to help slaughter roosters, and then she threw them in the back of my car. I said, well, I'm going to have to cook all of this. I'm going to write something about it.
You're a permaculturist. You turn problems into solutions.
Well, there you go. So it was, it was a match made in heaven. So, I learned a lot at least about cooking them, for sure.
That's funny. It never happened. Maybe one day I'm going to do it, but we ate an entire rooster. I don't know if you know this, but you can eat. I mean, the name of the blog was "This Farm Family Ate the Entire Rooster, Balls and All." You can eat. So
you choked that chicken, folks.
So I never did this, so it's up to you. Okay, we did it. We actually did it. We just never blogged about it, and it's time we weren't doing YouTube. But you can eat the comb.
Yep.
You can eat the tongue, and in Asia, these are like delicacies. You can suck the brains out. My gosh, you can eat the cheeks. We fried the head. You can eat the legs. You can clean out the intestines, eat that. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And it's funny because we had to go to Asian websites to get all these different recipes, but those are the delicacies, the heart, of course, the liver.
Yep.
We are throwing away a pound of food. I mean, we weighed it out. It was a pound of food.
Absolutely.
That we just normally throw in the gut bucket.
Right. Yeah. For me, a lot of that ends up in stock. But yeah, definitely, the combs and wattles are, I know in Italy they eat those. And the Chinese eat everything. Come on. It's like, who are we fooling? Like, they're probably the first to eat a lot of things.
Because essentially you can eat the bones too, because you're making bone broth. You can make blood rice. You drink the blood, eat the blood. And it's like, the only thing that we couldn't find a recipe for, even the feathers, like you don't recipe the feathers. They're high protein and calcium, but you would put them in a pill and swallow them.
Right.
As a protein calcium supplement. You could also, what's the other? Oh, the lungs. I don't think anybody has published on the internet a way to eat the lungs. I imagine you can. But
I lived in Yugoslavia in the 80s, and the lungs went in stuffing.
Oh, there you go.
It was just chopped up like any other offal and put in the stuffing, and they'd stuff the chicken with it.
Okay, there you go. You can eat every single thing.
Maybe
not the bile. Yeah, I guess you can't eat the bile side.
Yeah, you may not want to, but but as in permaculture, there's a way to use it. That's the thing. It's like even something's going to eat it. Something is going to right. That concludes part 1 of our interview with Justin Rhodes of AbundantPermaculture.com. Tune in next week for Justin's take on culling those ornery roosters, solutions for keeping birds when the temps drop below freezing, and how to watch his film, Permaculture Chickens. That's next week on the podcast.
The Nutrition Heretic Podcast is a production of Savor the Journey, LLC. Our audio editor is Nikola Popovich. Our podcast manager is Crystal McLean, and our operations manager is Linda Hansen. I'm your host, Adrian Hugh, the Nutrition Heretic. You can find us at nutritionheretic.com, where you can download the Nutrition Heretic's free shit list of 7 health foods to avoid like the plague. You can also listen to previous episodes at nutritionheretic.com/podcast. Be sure to like us on social media for updates. Our Facebook page is facebook.com/nutritionheretic and on Twitter @NutriHeretic. Contact us with show ideas, questions, or if you just want to be a guest. And don't forget to rate our podcast on iTunes and Stitcher. Thanks.